For most of my viewers, this is just going to be more of a just for the heck of it video, because for most people, lugging around this nearly 10-pound slab of ultra-rugged testosterone isn't going to be a viable option for a daily use laptop. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean a small part of all of us doesn't want one of these, or at least a chance to take a closer look at one. We've looked at rugged enterprise laptops before, such as the ThinkPad T series, but this Dell XFR E6420 is a whole class above that. Internally, this machine is basically just a standard Latitude E6420. This particular model has a dual-core i7-2620M with hyperthreading, 4GB of DDR3 at 1333 MHz, Nvidia MVS 4200M graphics, and for testing, a 240GB Kingston A400 SSD that I had laying around in the back, and I just tossed it into this laptop so we could get Windows up and running on it. So, while yes, this was a pretty mean machine in 2012, there's nothing really out of the ordinary here hardware-wise. On the outside, though, this is where the fun begins. If you look at the E6420 ATG, which is a happy medium between this XFR and the standard E6420, it's more or less using the same shell as the base model E6420 with some minor improvements to make it IP5X compliant, which basically just means it's dust resistant, but not quite 100% dust proof. The E6420 XFR, on the other hand, looks like a completely different machine. You wouldn't be able to tell this has any sort of relation to the base model E6420. The entire case has been reinforced and padded to meet 72-inch transient drop test requirements. Water and dust-tight doors cover all I/O so that it could be IP65 certified, meaning it's 100% dust-tight and can withstand being sprayed with pressurized water. On top of that, it meets 16 other environmental testing certifications. This thing makes your typical ThinkPad look like a MacBook when it comes to durability. The thing I was most curious about when it came to this laptop's design was how they achieved IP65 compliance with an active cooling solution. The bottom panel of the case has a foam gasket on its perimeter to prevent water ingress while still giving the user a semi-practical way to service the laptop. And I'd say semi-practical because it is a little tedious to remove all 23 screws holding the panel in place, but once removed, you have access to most things you are ever going to need access to. You can see a section of the rear panel's gasket that deviates from the panel's perimeter, around where the heatsink is. This is to isolate what Dell calls the sealed thermal chamber from the rest of the computer. Basically, the heatsink and fan get their own compartment that is sealed off from the rest of the inside of the laptop. So if you were to spray, let's say, water into the thermal chamber, in theory, none of that water should be able to reach any internal area of the laptop outside of the thermal chamber. So all of the critical internal components, such as your CPU, your GPU, everything else really inside the laptop stays completely dry. It's a similar story when looking at the keyboard. The area under the keyboard is completely sealed off minus some drainage. The keyboard itself is pleasant to type on, there is plenty of key travel, and it's backlit. Though I have to say that the lack of a track point is a huge disappointment for me personally. The 1366 by 768 14-inch display is also sealed to prevent water ingress, and I should note that this is one of the brightest screens on a laptop I have ever seen. At full brightness in an indoor environment, it's almost painful to look at. But when it comes to taking this thing outdoors, that's a good thing, because even in direct sunlight at full screen brightness, you can still make out most of the things on the screen. It's not quite OLPC level, but it's definitely usable outdoors. This model is also equipped with the optional touchscreen. However, even after installing all of the drivers and multiple calibration attempts, I could not get the thing to work correctly on Windows 10. Speaking of touch interfaces, the trackpad and corresponding trackpad buttons are pretty mediocre feeling and not really too pleasant to use, but honestly, I mean, they just get the job done, and those are also sealed from the elements. The trackpad buttons have a rubber enclosure around them, and the trackpad is completely sealed from any water or dust. For I/O, behind all of these doors, we have two USB 2.0 ports, a 3.5mm headphone jack, express card slot, DVD drive, HDMI, eSATA, RJ45, a power jack, serial DB9, VGA, and a card reader behind the same door as the hard drive. It's notable that you could also add USB 3.0 to the system by swapping out the DVD drive with a USB 3.0 expansion module. You might have noticed that this model has the doors for the RJ45 and power jack removed. I'm guessing someone got fed up with constantly having to deal with these when using the laptop on a daily basis, so they just took them off. And that's understandable because even while just testing, having these doors constantly get in my way really started to get on my nerves. The good news is that all of the doors can be removed via just 1 to 3 screws. The bad news is that the laptop is no longer IP65 compliant in that state. The 60 watt-hour lithium-ion battery can also be found behind one of these doors, though this one is absolutely dead and needs to be replaced, which we don't have the budget for. These XFR machines are still fairly expensive, which is one of the reasons I didn't do a review on one of these sooner. It's just price. These things hold their value pretty well even today. I mean, these were manufactured in 2012, and on eBay, I mean, you'll find these anywhere from $200 to $350 depending on the specs, so they're still pretty pricey laptops. And by the way, if you want to check out the seller where I bought this laptop from, I scored this thing for $210 off eBay. I will put the link to the seller store down in the description. Now back to the battery. The spec sheet does tout up to 7.5 hours of battery life, though usually those figures are a little inflated and should be taken with a grain of salt. When I first started messing around with this laptop, I was running into major thermal issues with regards to the GPU. And by issues, I mean extremely high temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Celsius. I was going to repaste everything anyway, so I applied some Arctic MX4 to the CPU and GPU, but that yielded no improvement. After a few hours of research and troubleshooting, I found that the heatsink wasn't even making contact with the GPU. The thermal paste was bridging the air gap, which worked well enough for the GPU to perform some minor tasks, but it didn't provide nearly enough thermal transfer for it to run benchmarks and games. So to fix this in a pinch, I found a pure copper penny and used it as a shim between the GPU and heatsink. Though grinding the penny flat would have been ideal, I was short on time, and a penny in its stock form brought temperatures back to acceptable levels. I'm not 100% positive what happened here. I'm guessing that maybe the last person who serviced this might have taken whatever was bridging that air gap between the GPU and heatsink out and forgotten to put it back in. Maybe it had a shim in place already and they just didn't reinstall it. Maybe it was using a thermal pad. I can't really say for certain because I don't have another one of these XFRs to compare to. Performance-wise, once again, very similar to the stock E6420. This is undeniably a completely usable, and I would even go as far to say fast, daily driver in 2020. Applications open instantly, websites load quickly, it even handled the hot mess that is CNN.com, and that's not meant to be political or anything. Their website is just really resource intensive. Same thing applies to Fox News, without any hiccups. When hooked up to my capture card outputting 1080p, it didn't skip a beat playing 1080p video at 60 FPS. And multitasking is actually pretty quick with light applications, even with only 4GB of RAM. With these Nvidia MVS graphics, this is actually an okay machine for some very occasional casual gaming. Minecraft ran at 30 frames per second with graphics set to fancy, and 40 to 50 FPS with the graphics set to fast. At 1080p in low settings, Left 4 Dead 2 was surprisingly playable at about 40 frames per second on average. Of course, I did try to run Crysis, but apparently there is a limit to the number of machines I can install that and use that on, and since I've tested on many machines up to now, I think I've exhausted that limit, so unfortunately we cannot run that in this video. So you can blame EA for that. Newer games such as Doom run like slideshows, but that's expected, and where this XFR really starts to show its age the most is when it comes to benchmarks. Before we end this video, there is one final thing I want to do, and that is to test a Linux distribution on this XFR. I expected pretty good Linux compatibility since Ubuntu 10.10 was actually a factory option, and I wasn't disappointed. With Ubuntu 18.04, almost everything worked out of the box. The Wi-Fi just worked, third-party video drivers were already installed, and even the laptop's stealth mode worked with no additional action on my end, which wasn't the same story on Windows 10. The only thing I had issue with was that the touchscreen didn't work out of the box, which actually wasn't too surprising. I didn't expect it to work out of the box. Performance was about the same story as it was on Windows. It's definitely snappy enough for a daily office machine, animations appeared smooth, and HD video played back without a hitch. So that is going to be about it for this look at the Dell XFR E6420. I've always wanted to take a look at one of these ultra rugged laptops, but I've never been able to afford one. They're finally starting to go down in price. I found one on eBay for cheap, and I got it. I finally got the chance to take a look at one of these, and I do not regret buying one off eBay. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't take a sledgehammer and, try to break it or run it over with my car or do some extreme stress testing like that, it's because I just couldn't afford to lose $210. If I break it, then I can't list it back on eBay for $200, and I'll be at a loss for this video. It doesn't make financial sense for me, and it's not possible. So that's why I didn't break out the big guns for this video. If it was like $40 or something around there, then it would probably be a different story, because I would really like to push this thing to its limits. But unfortunately, that's just not the case. If you're interested in anything that I used in the video today, for example, the Arctic MX4 thermal paste or the A400 SSD, both links will be down in the description. And by the way, those are affiliate links. Also, just to address something real quick, some people thought I stopped doing YouTube for good. That's not the case. I've done a couple live streams here and there, but I know I haven't really been active, and that's just because I've been super busy. I have a full-time job once again. I go to school, I'm getting my master's degree, and I'm trying to build a house right now. I don't have much time for this. I've been working this on the weekends, trying to, fit in getting footage when I can, but it's been very hard to do so lately. That's why it's taken so long to make this video. I'm not sure if you saw that eBay listing that I had in the video earlier, but I actually bought this laptop in, I believe, June. And I meant to make the video then, but I just got bogged down. So I have absolutely no plans to quit YouTube anytime soon. I did get rid of the Patreon just because it's not fair to you guys to take your money when I'm not really publishing content that often, so it was kind of bugging me, so I just got rid of it. But besides that, we are here to stay. So thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next installment of AA Computers and Technology.